Fantasy animation is not just for kids. Sometimes it rips the skin off reality and leaves you staring into madness. These 15 adult fantasy animations didn't just entertain, they unsettled, disturbed, and even traumatized. From psychedelic nightmares to ultra-violent mythologies, these are the films and series that push the genre into dangerous territory. Viewer discretion is absolutely advised. Number 15. Midori Shujo Tsubaki, 1992. There are disturbing animations. And then, there is Midori. Adapted from a banned manga by Suehiro Maruo, this grotesque fantasy horror tells the story of a young girl sold to a traveling freak show. What follows is a descent into absolute visual and psychological depravity. The circus performers are cruel mutants, and Midori becomes both victim and prisoner in a world soaked in exploitation. The animation itself is barely animation. Director Hiroshi Harada created this with hand-painted stills brought to life through slow, surreal transitions. That eerie aesthetic only heightens the sense of claustrophobia and despair. Released independently, with no official distributor, Midori was essentially a one-man project made out of pure obsession and rage against censorship. The violence is not stylized, it is raw and perverse. Even today, this film remains so controversial that many versions are heavily cut or simply not available outside Japan. Despite its trauma-inducing scenes, Midori has achieved cult status among underground animation circles. It is an unfiltered scream of pain, wrapped in vintage imagery and brutal allegory. There's no redemption, no fantasy escape, only horror rendered through ink and rage. Viewers who survived it often say they wish they had not watched it, and yet they cannot forget it either. Number 14. Berserk, 1997. There are few fantasy stories darker than Berserk. This anime adaptation of Kentaro Miura's iconic manga is not for the faint-hearted. It begins as a tale of sword and honor, but quickly twists into an abyss of betrayal, demons, and bloodshed. Set in a brutal medieval world, it follows Guts, a lone mercenary caught in a cursed fate that leads straight to hell. What made the 1997 adaptation so shocking wasn't just the gore, though there is plenty, but the overwhelming psychological torment. The infamous Eclipse episode in particular left viewers scarred. Major characters are slaughtered, friends become monsters, and the protagonist suffers one of the most horrifying betrayals in animation history. The fantasy here is not magical, but hellish, a world ruled by violence, madness, and cosmic evil. The animation may look dated, but the narrative is timeless in its savagery. Themes of trauma, fate, and survival are etched into every frame. And unlike many dark fantasy series, Berserk refuses to offer hope. It is a relentless nightmare of broken morality and unhealed wounds. Even anime veterans often cite Berserk as the most emotionally devastating series they've ever endured. It does not entertain, it devastates. Number 13. Belladonna of Sadness, 1973. No one was prepared for what Belladonna of Sadness unleashed. This avant-garde Japanese animation blends eroticism with medieval horror in a surreal explosion of watercolor agony. Directed by Eiichi Yamamoto and produced by Osamu Tezuka's Mushi production, the film follows a woman named Jian who is raped by nobility and descends into witchcraft madness and spiritual rebellion. The visuals are unlike anything in animation history. Instead of traditional frame-by-frame motion, the film often lingers on still illustrated tableaus, elegant, grotesque, and sexually explicit, slowly panned or zoomed across to a hypnotic score. As Jean makes a Faustian bargain to survive the patriarchy, she transforms into a figure of divine vengeance. But this is no empowerment fantasy. It is a descent into a purgatory of abuse and possession, rendered in psychedelic flames and phallic nightmares. For decades, the film was buried, censored, and dismissed as too explicit, too dangerous. Only in recent years has it been restored and reevaluated as a feminist masterpiece and a visual triumph. It is erotic and disturbing, sacred and profane. Few films, animated or not, confront female trauma and social oppression with such bold expressionism. Belladonna of Sadness is not fantasy to escape into. It is fantasy to be consumed by. Number 12. Heavy Metal, 1981. When heavy metal exploded onto screens in 1981, it was like a comic book acid trip given life. Based on the infamous underground magazine of the same name, this animated anthology fused sci-fi, horror, fantasy, and erotica into one shocking cinematic brew. It was loud, vulgar, violent, and unapologetically adult. Each segment tells a different story, linked by a glowing orb of pure evil. The Loch-Nar. From post-apocalyptic wastelands to alien gladiator arenas to sword-wielding heroines, the animation revels in excess. Nudity flows freely. Violence erupts without warning. The rotoscoped visuals and wildly varied art styles only heighten the feeling of chaos. It feels less like a movie and more like stumbling into a stoner's fever dream of pulp magazines brought to life. Mainstream critics were appalled, but it became an instant cult classic. Metalheads, fantasy fans, and rebellious teens saw in heavy metal a cinematic middle finger to the sanitized animation of the time. It was adult animation with zero restraint. Decades later, it still holds power, not because it's polished or coherent, but because it dared to go all in on sex, swords, space, and shock. Number 11, The Wolf House, 2018. If David Lynch made a fairy tale in clay, it might look like The Wolf House. This Chilean stop-motion horror fantasy is one of the most disturbing adult animations of the 21st century. It tells the story of a girl escaping a cult-like community into a house that shifts and melts around her. But it's really an allegory for abuse and control inside Chile's real-life Colonia Dignidad. The animation technique is relentless. It uses stop-motion in a single-take illusion, where walls collapse into puppets, objects morph into people, and everything feels handmade and haunted. There's no sense of safety. The house is alive. It breathes, grows, and eventually devours. What starts as surreal soon becomes suffocating. The fantasy becomes horror, and the horror becomes reality. Viewers unfamiliar with the historical background may still sense something is off. That's intentional. The film was designed as psychological warfare. It's a commentary on fascism, religion, trauma, and indoctrination, but told through wax figures and dolls in an endless nightmare loop. There are no heroes, no comfort, only the whisper that even fairy tales can be traps. The Wolf House is not entertainment. It is an exorcism. Here is part 3 of your YouTube documentary script. 15 adult fantasy animations that shocked the viewers. Number 10. Fire and Ice, 1983. Fire and Ice wasn't just a fantasy cartoon. It was a barbarian fever dream painted in blood and steel. Directed by Ralph Bakshi and co-created with legendary fantasy artist Frank Frazetta, the film used rotoscope animation to create hyper-realistic motion that turned every sword fight and chase scene into a living Frazetta painting. The result was both hypnotic and savage. The plot is simple on the surface. Evil Ice Lord attacks peaceful Fire Kingdom. A princess is kidnapped. A savage warrior must save her. But the imagery elevates the story into mythic chaos. Bare-chested heroes fight mutated beasts in lava caves. Jungle girls battle shadow warriors. The landscape itself becomes a character, primal, violent, and dripping with sexuality. The female lead, Tigra, wears almost nothing. The violence is raw and animalistic. This was fantasy for adults in every sense of the word. Critics were confused. Audiences were mesmerized. It became a cult favorite, especially among fans of Conan-style pulp. Bakshi's rough cinematic energy combined with Frazetta's heavy metal dreamscapes turned Fire and Ice into an animated epic unlike anything from the mainstream studios. It's not elegant. It's not safe. It's fire. It's ice. And it still burns. Number 9. Fantastic Planet, 1973. Imagine if a dream had teeth. That's Fantastic Planet. This French-Czech sci-fi fantasy allegory stuns with its cutout-style animation and otherworldly designs. The story? Humans, or Oms, are kept as pets by giant blue aliens called Drogs. But the humans begin to rebel. It's a parable of oppression, revolution, and the madness of perspective. Director René Laloux didn't make cartoons. He made hallucinations with political bite. The surrealist world is filled with hybrid creatures, rituals, and plant life that defy biology. Every moment is unpredictable. The music is eerie and trance-like. The colors shift like oil slicks. But beneath the trippy visuals is a brutal message about colonialism, dehumanization, and what happens when knowledge becomes resistance. When it premiered at Cannes, audiences didn't know how to process it. Some called it brilliant, others called it disturbing. Everyone agreed it was unforgettable. Fantastic Planet is not just a visual experiment. It is a provocation, the kind of film that doesn't fade. It lingers like smoke after a fire. Its fantasy doesn't comfort, it confronts. Number 8. Felidae, 1994. A murder mystery starring cats shouldn't be horrifying. Felidae proved otherwise. This German animated film shocked audiences with its blend of noir atmosphere, graphic violence, and disturbing philosophical overtones, all told through the eyes of a street-smart feline named Francis. It begins with a murder and unravels into a conspiracy of genetic horror. The cats are beautifully animated, but the world they inhabit is filled with corpses, cults, and cruelty. As Francis investigates, he uncovers a series of mutilated cat bodies, leading to a mad scientist's experiments in feline eugenics. The climax features nightmarish flashbacks of experiments, torture, and mass feline suicide, scenes more intense than many live-action thrillers. Based on the best-selling novel by Akif Pirinci, the film was never intended for children, but many stumbled onto it expecting another Aristocats. Instead, they got a gritty existential drama about morality, science, and survival. Feliday asks questions no fantasy animation dared before, about the cost of evolution and the limits of reason. For those who watched it unprepared, the shock was permanent. Number 7. Angel's Egg, 1985. Angel's Egg is less a film and more a visual prayer whispered from the depths of despair. Directed by Mamoru Oshii with artwork by Yoshitaka Amano, this nearly silent Japanese animation plunges viewers into a ruined Gothic world where time has stopped, faith has shattered, and two unnamed characters wander through symbols rather than story. The girl carries an enormous egg she refuses to crack. The boy follows her and questions everything. They speak rarely. The world around them is flooded with the relics of a forgotten civilization. Crucified birds, ancient machines, and ghostly fishermen hunting invisible shadows. There are no answers, only metaphors and sorrow. The fantasy here is theological. It deals with loss of belief, the death of purpose, and the quiet madness that fills the void. Its Christian symbolism and haunting stillness make it feel more like a cathedral of melancholy than a movie. Oshii reportedly created it during a personal crisis of faith, and it shows in every fragile line and echoing silence. Viewers expecting anime action were bewildered. Some hated it, others worship it. Today, Angel's Egg is a cult artifact, a holy grail of surreal fantasy animation. It does not explain itself, it invites you to be lost, and sometimes that is more powerful than any plot. Number 6. Princess, 2006. Princess is a violent Danish animation that defies genre and morality. It begins with August, a missionary priest, returning home to bury his sister Christina, a former adult film star known as Princess, who died of drug abuse. But her 5-year-old daughter Mia has been left behind, surrounded by the pornography empire that profited from her mother's ruin. August takes her and declares war on everyone involved. What follows is a blood-soaked crusade of vengeance that mixes brutal animation with documentary-style footage and jarring flashbacks. August becomes both savior and destroyer. As he spirals into rage, Mia witnesses horrors no child should. The film's fantasy lies in its stylized violence and moral allegory, but there is no redemption. Just scorched earth. Director Anders Morgenthaler didn't pull punches. The animation style is deliberately ugly at times, resembling scribbled trauma. Themes of exploitation, hypocrisy, and trauma are laid bare. It is not entertainment, it is confrontation, and for many viewers, the intensity was too much. But beneath its ugliness lies a chilling parable about the commodification of innocence and the price of righteous fury. Princess is a film that demands to be survived rather than enjoyed. It's animated revenge at its most unsettling. Number 5. Wizards, 1977. Ralph Bakshi's Wizards is a psychedelic paradox, a fantasy tale that blends Nazi propaganda footage with fairy tale characters and stoned narration. Set in a post-apocalyptic Earth where magic has returned and technology is feared, the film tells the story of two warring wizard brothers, the peaceful Avatar and the evil Black Wolf, who has unearthed ancient war films to rally mutant armies. On the surface, it feels like a Tolkien-esque quest, with elves, fairies, and heroic battles, but Bakshi pulls the rug constantly. The animation mixes rotoscope war footage with traditional cartoon aesthetics. Swastikas flash across screens, mutants chant fascist slogans, and amidst the mayhem, the film drops hard commentary about propaganda, memory, and power. Though it was marketed as fantasy, Wizards shocked audiences with its jarring tonal shifts and bleak undertones. The climactic scene, where magic loses to a gun, flips genre expectations with brutal finality. Bakshi intended this as both satire and warning. In his world, the real evil is not orcs or dragons. It is ideology recycled through screens. Decades later, Wizards still baffles and bewilders. It's not clean. It's not comforting. It's a fantasy born from war guilt and acid trips, and somehow that makes it unforgettable. Number 4. The Spine of Night, 2021. Few modern fantasy animations punch as hard as The Spine of Night. This ultra-violent rotoscope film throws audiences into a cosmic epic of magic, corruption, and rebellion across centuries. Influenced heavily by heavy metal and Ralph Bakshi's classics, it channels 70s pulp but cranks the gore philosophy and ambition to 11. The story centers on a forbidden blue flower called the Bloom, a source of immense power. As it passes from mystics to tyrants to rebels, the world cycles through brutality and decay. Bodies explode, sorcerers disintegrate armies, ancient gods whisper dark truths. The animation is raw, almost primal, not slick, but burning with intent. And the dialogue is steeped in grim wisdom as characters debate fate, knowledge, and the cost of resistance. What makes the film shocking is not just the violence, though it is graphic and relentless, but the nihilism. Heroes are decapitated, empires fall. The very idea of justice feels irrelevant. It's a fantasy without safety nets, one where power always corrupts and history always bleeds. For viewers expecting modern polish or Marvel-style quips, this is a brutal awakening. The Spine of Night resurrected the old-school adult fantasy style and drenched it in existential dread. It's beautiful and terrifying, animated with passion, written like a sacred scroll dipped in acid. Number 3. Ergo Proxy, 2006. Ergo Proxy is cerebral fantasy wrapped in cyberpunk aesthetics. While marketed as sci-fi, the show's mythic overtones and existential dreamscapes place it firmly in adult fantasy territory. Set in a post-apocalyptic domed city where humans coexist with androids called auto-reeves, it follows Riel Mayer, a government agent, and Vincent Law, a mysterious immigrant, both of whom unravel not just political conspiracies, but the fabric of reality itself. The proxy creatures that haunt the world are godlike figures tied to memory, identity, and creation. Their presence turns every investigation into a philosophical riddle. One episode might feel like Orwellian dystopia, the next like a hallucinated fairy tale. Religious symbolism permeates everything. The characters are haunted not by monsters, but by ideas. What is humanity? What is original sin? Can consciousness evolve? Or is it cursed? What shocks viewers is the depth and ambiguity. Ergo Proxy refuses to handhold. It's filled with silent sequences, abstract visuals, and emotional breakdowns. It challenges instead of comforts. Many were confused, others were obsessed. It gained a cult following for daring to explore spirituality, trauma, and consciousness in ways few animations ever do. Ergo Proxy is not light watching. It's a descent into a cathedral of questions, one lit by the dying light of forgotten gods. Number 2. Legend of the Overfiend, 1989. Legend of the Overfiend is one of the most notorious adult fantasy animations ever created. Released as Urotsuki Doji in Japan, this film didn't just push boundaries. It shattered them with a sledgehammer. A mix of Lovecraftian horror, ancient prophecy, and erotic violence, the story follows a demonic prophecy about the Chojin, an almighty being destined to unite humans, demons, and beastmen in a new world. The film's art style shifts from mystical elegance to grotesque monstrosity. Cities collapse into flesh. Tentacled nightmares rip through dimensions. Human bodies explode or transform into unspeakable creatures. It is a fantasy epic told through mutation, lust, and apocalypse. Critics called it depraved. Fans called it legendary. What shocked viewers most was how far it went. Legend of the Overfiend introduced tentacle erotica into global animation consciousness. It was banned or censored in multiple countries. Even in its heavily edited versions, the film remains unsettling. Its surreal world-building and mythological ambitions are buried under an avalanche of taboo-breaking scenes. It's not just NSFW, it's nearly NSFE, not safe for existence. Yet, despite its controversy, it influenced an entire generation of adult animation. For better or worse, Overfiend proved that anime could be fantasy horror on an unholy scale, drenched in sin, soaked in prophecy, and unforgettable in the worst possible way. Number 1. Watership Down, 1978. No animated film has traumatized generations of children quite like Watership Down. Marketed as a story about rabbits searching for a new home, it unfolds as a brutal saga of survival, death, and prophecy. Based on the novel by Richard Adams, this British production holds nothing back. Rabbits are gassed, snared, and torn apart. Blood flies, eyes roll back. Hope is shattered again and again. The animation style is soft watercolor, but the story is a Greek tragedy in fur. The main characters are soldiers, prophets, and refugees. The villainous General Woundwort is a tyrant straight out of war cinema, and the spiritual lore of rabbit mythology, the Black Rabbit of Inlay, introduces a death cult that would scar viewers for decades. Critics praised it, parents were horrified, children cried, yet many came back to it as adults and discovered a deep allegory for fascism, exile, and resilience. It's not trauma for shock's sake, it's honest. Nature is cruel, freedom is costly, and sometimes courage means running through fields of blood. Watership Down shocked the world because it never pandered. It respected animation as literature, as myth, as horror, and it remains perhaps the most emotionally devastating fantasy ever put on film. These aren't bedtime stories. They're animated revelations. Each of these adult fantasy works tore open the genre and exposed its rawest nerves. They dared to disturb, to awaken, to question. If any shocked you into rethinking animation, hit subscribe and tell us which one scarred or inspired you most.